Everybody. I was asked this question a while back, and I've actually heard it come up in different circles. And then I did a video today and accidentally deleted it. So I'm redoing this video. But even after I did the video, the topic came up again recently. So I think it's a topic that we need to talk about, or that could be helpful to just have a conversation about. And I'm really curious, what do you think about this question? And what are your experiences with the concept of trauma or common experiences of trauma? So the question that I was asked is, does everyone have trauma? And then it kind of goes into this thought that I've heard several times in some of my circles. Well, if everything's trauma, then nothing's trauma. And so, what really is trauma? And things start to get watered down when we use any term over and over again, and any concept, it starts to become meaningless. So even the concepts of like narcissistic personality disorder, narcissism, you hear the word a lot. What does it really mean? And are we losing the impact of the damage that happens through narcissism? I really think that some of this has to do with context and understandings about what we think of with these terms. So, are the terms actually bringing us to a place where it means nothing? What does it mean? Today, I'm just going to focus on the word trauma. And one of the things I think is important to identify is the difference between what's commonly referred to as small t trauma and big T trauma. Generally, when we think of something that was traumatic or that I lived through something that was called trauma, we think of big events that were horrific. So, for example, sexual abuse, molestation, maybe getting physically assaulted and mugged out, when you're out in public somewhere, or, like these big things that we would know that was traumatic. A horrible car crash, that is traumatic. And then there's other events that are also traumatic in a sense, because what trauma is something that completely overwhelms our nervous system and our brain and body's capacity to deal with that particular event. That's one way to put it. It causes an injury. It's so overwhelming. It's not just being overwhelmed, it's so overwhelming that it causes damage internally that starts to leak out in our lives. And small t trauma tends to be something that gets unaddressed and unacknowledged in a lot of areas of people's lives. And I think that the small t traumas have a role in some of the dissension and the disconnection that we feel with other people, the dissension and disunity that we have, the finger pointing and the blaming, and all these different things, because people are may have wounds that have never been healed. And whether you want to consider them trauma or not, my point is, what has happened in our lives that became something that was overwhelming to our nervous system, shifted our internal belief systems, and as a result, impacts the way we live and the way that we show up in the world. So, when I think of some of the small t traumas, those might be events, let's say as a child, you are fairly sensitive to other people's facial responses, and you're sensitive in the sense that you start to feel things that other people feel. And your parent is not that way. They don't have that same sensitivity. That's like a different wiring in them, for whatever reason. And you feel angry about something, but you're told not to be angry. You start to feel sad, and you're constantly, the feeling that you have is dismissed over and over and over again. You're actually experiencing a form of neglect, that somebody who cannot be with you in that emotional capacity. And when that happens repeatedly, that's like these small t traumas, especially for someone who is highly sensitive in those areas, because what happens is they start to feel very alone, and there's this internal message, something's wrong with me. And that's where it becomes more problematic, because the underlying beliefs are being shaped. And it may not be this big trauma event, but either way, whether you want to consider it a small t trauma or something that was a deep wound in someone's life, it has an effect later in life. And when I'm working with people in therapy, for example, we're looking at some of the root causes that are causing present day problems. I can't do quite the same thing in coaching. We're looking more at present day problems, but we may get an understanding from the past. We're really focused on present and future oriented topics. Um, so, one of the things that I see though that comes across I'm not highlighting this. Usually, this happens for me when I'm watching TV shows. So this is where I hesitate because I start to think about something that's just like a TV show that I'm not recommending any specific TV shows, but sometimes I see these things play out in TV shows about relational dynamics and what happens. And I think that it kind of highlights some things that are common experiences for us or common things that we want to experience, like romantic comedies and those types of things, or some different shows, even my superhero shows, you'll sometimes see somebody respond with empathy in a way that we long to experience. And somehow those writers have captured that. Um, what I'm thinking about today with the way that trauma impacts us is the way that it keeps us in this self protection mode, denying pain because that's a way that we coped with something that was overwhelming. We have a natural system in our brains to protect ourselves. Problem is that when we keep having to protect ourselves in certain situations that didn't feel safe and probably weren't emotionally safe, physically safe, sexually safe, financially safe, all these different areas, relationally safe, later, if we don't acknowledge what's been happening or face what's been happening, we can have a lot of issues that show up present day without even knowing it has anything to do with that. We can even have things that we don't remember at all. I work with clients who don't have specific memories about certain things in their past, but something is showing up today, and that is the present concern. For example, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. The anxiety, I can't get it under control. It's causing me to miss work, or I'm not going out to meet with my friends, or I'm not finding new friends. I'm scared because I've had these deep wounds, these deep church hurts. For example, I deal with a lot of people who've come out of faith communities and or have are struggling. They want to be in faith communities, but they've been hurt so much, and they want to be vulnerable. They want a place where they can connect with other people at a real heart level, and they have been hurt in those areas. And so taking new steps feels very scary. So that might be something that starts to show up. And so maybe that's not technically a big trauma event, but it may have been, depending on how overwhelming that was for the nervous system. Did it cause a significant injury that is showing up in the present? And how's that impacting our lives? So when I'm thinking about, does everyone have trauma? Honestly, I think a lot of people do have trauma. It may not be helpful to call everything trauma because, right, some things are just harmful things that we need to maybe sometimes we can get through it by changing our focus, changing our perspective, having new experiences, and it's fairly easy to recover from that. So that's not trauma. That's just something that hurt, that was wounding, etc. Trauma is going to be something that's more of a serious wound that is internal, that can't be seen, but in some way is showing up in our present lives. Maybe it's showing up through compulsions, addictions, um, compulsive purchases, eating, maybe even OCD type of compulsiveness, or um, fear of really living out who you're designed to be, which is one of my big passion areas in the Cultivate Together community. It's a place where people can grow and have new experiences with one another to develop the person they are as God designed them to be. If you're interested in something like that, there's a wait list. Excuse me, you can go to joleneunderwood.com/cultivate together and get on the wait list for next time this opens. Um, but we have to have some new experiences to help our brains and our bodies know that we're safe, know that we can get through hard things. Even if it's not a trauma thing, but it was just something that was hurtful, there's still areas of our brain and our hearts that have been shaped kind of out of sync in some way. So it kind of takes us off track of where we want to be. And by doing some of the reflective work and identifying that something's going on inside of us, that gives us a starting place to experience new growth and new healing in our lives, new ways of connecting with other people, new possibilities for showing up in this world the way that we're designed to be in our unique design, a unique creation. Okay, going back to trauma, big trauma, little trauma. Um, I do think that there's a lot of unaddressed wounds, at least we'll say that, that keep us from fully experiencing who we're designed to be, from experiencing more freedom and enjoyment in relationship with other people and in relationship with God. It's not easy to notice patterns in ourselves. But when we start to see that the pain that we're avoiding is actually causing us longer term pain, sometimes that's enough to give us that nudge to do some of the self reflective work or identifying what is it in me that's getting triggered? What is it in me that's coming to the surface? Is there something going on that maybe I need to address? It doesn't mean that we need to go pick out every single little thing, but start to notice that there's certain patterns that are showing up that are causing problems today. If so, take a look at it. One thing you could do is use my tool Unleash Heart and Soul Care Sheets, which you can find at jillianunderwood.com/unleash or acultivatedlife.me. You could go to either one of those places. The first one will give you some basic information. It's going to ultimately take you to acultivatedlife.me, which is where the course is hosted. So let's say it as a course, but what it is really is a PDF with some teaching videos that facilitates a process between you and God, is a tool to facilitate identifying things that are happening. So, for example, you start to notice, I'm having issues every time I this event happens, I react in a certain way, or I'm starting to blame my spouse, get angry at my kids. I'm doing something. If you're starting to notice some patterns in your own life, then you can identify what's happening in the Unleash sheets and then evaluate. It's going to guide you through your thoughts and your feelings and engagement with God in the process as you're working through some of that. So that's one tool that you could do on your own. Even just journaling and talking with friends that are safe, people that, and when I say safe, I mean they give you the space to have feelings and to have thoughts, and they don't shut them down or dismiss them, because that does cause harm. So, those can be helpful ways of starting to just check in with ourselves. Maybe it's trauma, maybe it's not trauma, maybe it's just a wound that's not that it doesn't take that much to get through. But if a pattern is really persistent and the problem is pervasive in our lives, it speaks to a deeper injury that is more likely a traumatic wound, even if it's small traumas because they built up over time. And that has an impact on our ability to, um, you know how Paul in I forget which book of the New Testament he talks about this in, where he says, "I do the things I do not want to do, and I don't do the things I want to do." There's that gap between the things we know to be true about ourselves, about God, about what He says about us, and then the things that we actually believe, because that's what drives how we act. Um, and so, doing some of this reflection gives us an opportunity to bridge that gap and to live out of a place of where I don't just say these things. I know that I know that I know. And I can find peace in that. And I can find rest for my spirit, for my soul. That is my heart's longing for all of us as we are growing a cultivated life. I would love to hear from you if you have any thoughts about trauma, or in whether it's small trauma, big trauma, or even just deep wounds, and what it's like to heal and to grow and to um, experience new ways of being in this world. I don't know how else to put that. Maybe that's a really vague thing to say, but I think of how we show up as the way that we talk to people, the way that we relate to others, the risks that we take when it comes to a job or fun, different activities. How we show up is impacted by our belief systems, by past experiences, and there are opportunities for that to shift, whether it's trauma or not. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd love to chat further, and I hope this was helpful in some way. Talk to you later.